Since childhood, most of us have been taught that death is final. The curtain falls, the lights go out, and that's it. Game over. But what if that idea is completely wrong? An illusion handed down to keep us blind? There exists an ancient document, once sealed away from the public, that claims death doesn't conclude anything. That, in fact, it's only the starting point of something far more serious. An unseen process that stretches across 49 days. According to the sacred Tibetan teachings, what happens after your last breath isn't silence or nothingness. Instead, consciousness continues, stripped of body and form, facing something far more intense, a series of internal trials that determine what comes next. This place, known as the Bardo, isn't a static realm. It shifts, morphs, and responds to the inner state of the soul. It's a space where time bends, where thoughts take shape, and where every unresolved part of you rises to the surface. The vast majority aren't ready. They don't fail because they're weak. They fail because they're unaware. They can't see the test for what it is. They don't realize that what appears around them, the sounds, the sights, the feelings, isn't some external force. It's them, projected outward. The first mistake souls make is thinking they're at the mercy of divine beings or random fate. But what unfolds in those 49 days is shaped entirely by the mind they brought with them. And the cost of ignorance? Repetition. Those who can't navigate this process get drawn back into another life, another cycle, repeating the same patterns, driven by unresolved emotions and unconscious attachments. Death isn't an eraser, it's a mirror. One that reflects everything you've hidden from yourself, and that mirror doesn't lie. What lies ahead is not a journey to some heavenly throne or a pit of punishment. It's a trial of perception, a confrontation with truth, not imposed from an above but born from within. Those who pass it move on to something extraordinary. Those who don't, they start over, without even realizing it. When the body stops, awareness doesn't vanish, it shifts. No heartbeat, no breath. Yet something remains alert. A quiet realization dawns. You've left the physical behind, but you're still here. This isn't like dreaming. It's not like sleep either. It feels more like waking up in a version of reality that was always there, just hidden behind the noise of life. And then, without warning, something utterly overwhelming appears. A blazing brilliance, brighter than any sun, warmer than any fire. It's not light as we know it, it's something deeper, more complete. This is what ancient Tibetan masters called the clear light of ultimate reality. In this exact moment, a soul has its greatest opportunity. If you recognize this light, not with your eyes, but with pure awareness, and allow yourself to dissolve into it, something incredible happens. You are freed, not later. Not after judgment. Right now, the entire loop of suffering and rebirth disintegrates instantly. No more repetition, no more illusion, just pure liberation, but hardly anyone accepts it. Why? Because fear kicks in. The identity, the you built from years of memories, relationships, regrets, clings. It doesn't want to vanish, and so, instead of merging with that radiant presence, the soul hesitates. It recoils, and in that hesitation the chance is lost. The light doesn't punish. It simply recedes. What follows is the mind's response to fear, an endless stream of images, sounds, sensations, but none of it is real in the way we think. It's mental projection, the psyche trying to make sense of the unfamiliar. That first moment is not a metaphor. It's the crucial fork in the road. Either you let go entirely and awaken, or you resist and get pulled into the next phase. And most, they resist, not because they are weak, but because they were never taught to recognize the truth when it shines. After the light fades, something strange begins to unfold. The world doesn't stay dark or empty. Instead, something starts to form. But it's not coming from the outside. It's being generated from within. You begin to hear faint sounds, whispers, distant voices, half-formed melodies. Faces begin to emerge. Some feel familiar. Maybe it's a loved one. Maybe it's a figure from a faith you once believed in. But look closer. Something's off. They flicker, they shift. Their presence doesn't feel solid. This is not another realm filled with spirits. You're still not seeing reality. You're watching your own mind unravel. This place, the Bardo, isn't populated by divine beings or demons. It's filled with your thoughts, fears, hopes, and beliefs, dressed in whatever forms your subconscious gives them. The comforting image of a parent, the stern face of a deity, a place that resembles your childhood home. None of it exists independently. These are reflections, like a movie projected from the reels of your own unresolved life. And here's the trap. Most souls don't realize this. They try to reach out to these forms. They speak, they follow, they believe. And the moment they do, the illusion tightens its grip. Instead of moving forward, they wander deeper into the maze their own thoughts are creating. Each comforting shape is a loop. Each terrifying figure is just suppressed fear made visible. Even the peaceful images, angels, ancestors, spiritual guides, are nothing more than symbolic masks your psyche uses to process transition. The Tibetans understood this. They taught that every single thing witnessed in this stage is a test of perception, not punishment, not reward, just your mind, showing you everything you've hidden from yourself. To escape, you must see through it. But the tragedy, most don't even know they're being tested. They mistake the illusion for truth, and once that happens, they get lost. In a reality built entirely from within, a dream they no longer know they're dreaming. As the soul drifts deeper into the Bardo, the illusions grow bolder. What begins as gentle, glowing presences soon becomes a full-blown theater of the psyche. At first, the scenes are serene, warm light, soft voices, beings that radiate love. They seem like angels, or enlightened masters, or guardians of some higher truth. But here's the twist: they're not real, at least not in the way we're conditioned to believe. They are fragments of your highest potential, your own inner wisdom, trying to guide you. They reflect who you could have been, had you lived without fear, without distraction, without forgetting who you really are. If recognized, these radiant forms offer a way out, not through worship, but through understanding. They are invitations, not saviors, and this is where the second major challenge unfolds. The first test was at the moment of death, whether you could recognize the clear light. Now the trial is this: can you see through the illusion of comfort? Many don't. They pause, they hesitate, they question what's real. And in that flicker of doubt, everything changes. The luminous guides begin to distort. What once felt divine now feels unfamiliar. Their features bend, their light flickers. Peace gives way to pressure, then fear. And suddenly the scene flips, the faces contort, the air thickens. Dark, grotesque figures rise from the edges of consciousness. They snarl, they loom, they threaten. But they are not demons. They are you. Your guilt, your anger, every emotion you buried, every memory you denied. Now given form, they do not arrive to punish you. They manifest because your mind can't escape them. And here's the secret: they only have power if you believe they do. Fear is the fuel. The more you panic, the more vivid they become. This is the second gate, the test of self-mastery. To pass, you must do the hardest thing possible: remain still in the face of chaos. Recognize these monsters not as enemies, but as mirrors, those who hold their ground, who don't react, who refuse to believe in the nightmare. Watch it all dissolve. The torment evaporates, the noise quiets, clarity returns. This stage isn't just about surviving. It's about proving you've learned to navigate your own mind, Without that, no freedom is possible. After the chaos, the noise quiets. The illusions fade, the visions pull back. And just when the soul begins to think it has escaped, it happens. There are no monsters, no guides, no distractions, just silence. And then, a shift. You feel yourself being drawn backward, not in space, but in time. This isn't memory. It's immersion. You don't recall moments from your life. You re-enter them, every step you took, every word you spoke, every emotion you triggered, both in yourself and in others, returns in full force. But it's not just from your own perspective anymore. You are there again. But this time you are everyone you affected. If you caused pain, you experience that hurt as the one who received it. If you offered love, you feel the warmth from the other side. Every ripple you sent out echoes back, clear, raw, unavoidable. This is not judgment. No voice condemns you. No divine figure weighs your soul on a scale. You do. And it is the most honest moment of your existence. There are no justifications, no explanations, no opportunity to edit the past, only presence. Most people live avoiding the truth of who they are. We bury regret. We rationalize cruelty. We hide behind excuses. But here, there's nowhere left to hide. For those who lived with integrity, this phase feels like light returning home. For others, it is a crushing wave, a confrontation with the very self they spent a lifetime ignoring. This review is not punishment. It's the unveiling of the truth you couldn't see while alive, and the consequences don't end with the past. What you feel now becomes the blueprint for what happens next. If guilt clings, if remorse overwhelms, if attachment tightens its grip, you're pulled back, not by force, not by fate, but by the weight of your own unresolved emotions. The next life forms in response to your final emotional state. Not because a god decides, because you do unconsciously. The energy you carry, fear, shame, longing, becomes the gravity that draws you into another round. But for those who accept what they see, who let go of regret, who embrace the truth without resistance, a door begins to open. And what's beyond that door depends on whether you can face the reflection and not look away. Once the flood of memory settles and the soul finishes reliving its own story, something subtle begins to stir. There's no announcement, no signal, just a quiet current, pulling. You might not even notice it at first. It begins as a feeling, a tug, a strange longing for something familiar, the sound of a voice, the outline of a face, a sense of warmth. But this isn't comfort. It's momentum. Everything the soul just experienced, the remorse, the joy, the unresolved desires, it coalesces into an emotional weight, and that weight acts like a magnet. This is karma. Not some cosmic punishment, but the residue of your own choices. It draws you not to a specific destination, but toward an emotional frequency, one that matches the state of mind you now carry, and you don't choose where you go next. The emotion chooses for you. If you're clinging to sorrow, you'll return somewhere sorrow thrives. If regret fills you, you'll enter a life shaped by the need to resolve it. If you're still holding on to anything, identity, relationships, revenge, it will become the seed of your next incarnation. What feels like fate is just the mind following its own unfinished business. And here's the cruel elegance. The soul doesn't recognize this as rebirth. It sees it as reunion. The forms that appear feel welcoming. They look like family. They sound like belonging. But they are blueprints for your next existence, the beginning stages of entering a new life. The soul leans in, comforted by the illusion, and in that moment of attachment, the cycle restarts, without memory, without awareness, without realizing what's been lost. No alarms, no farewell, just a drift into another body. And so the process repeats, not because of sin, not because of divine judgment, but because the mind was still entangled. Only those who see this process as it unfolds, who remain fully detached, can escape its grip, because the truth is brutal. Rebirth is not something that happens to you. It's something your mind automatically creates when it can't let go. As the final days of the Bardo unfold, the soul reaches a threshold. The chaos has subsided. The monsters are gone. The trials seem to be over. But this calm, it's not safety. It's the most dangerous stage of all. By now, the soul is exhausted. It has watched its entire life replay, encountered every corner of its own mind, and survived the pull of fear and regret. And just when it seems like nothing more could happen, it appears. Familiarity. It starts with small things. A mother's voice, the scent of a childhood memory, a warm golden light that feels like home. Then come the faces, smiling, loving, familiar. Places you once knew begin to form. Homes, streets, people long gone. It all feels right, but it isn't. This is the final deception, the most subtle and seductive illusion. These visions don't arrive to guide you. They are the first fragments of your next life, projected outward to lure you into the next womb. They're not ghosts, they're karmic blueprints. Every soul is drawn toward the thing it can't let go of, a lost love, a desire unfulfilled, a life that felt incomplete. And so the Bardo shows you that thing, not to help but to test. If you reach for it, if you lean in, if you believe it's real, you're gone. Instantly, the decision is made, and the soul is swept away into a new cycle, a new form, with no memory of what just happened. It feels like drifting off to sleep, then opening your eyes, crying your first breath. This is why almost no one escapes. By this point, the illusions are so beautiful, so perfect, so intimate, that recognizing them as false requires a level of clarity most never cultivate. But for the rare soul who remains still, who sees these images not as salvation but as temptation, the illusion cracks, the faces fade, the warmth recedes, and in its place silence, freedom. To reach this moment and not fall for the trick requires absolute detachment, not coldness, but clarity. You must recognize that everything you love is part of the dream, and if you chase it, the dream resets. The cycle does not end when you die. It ends when you no longer want to return. Most people spend their lives avoiding the one thing that's guaranteed. Death is treated like a distant storm, real, but always far off. We distract ourselves with obligations, indulgences, ambitions. We plan vacations. We chase success. We rarely pause to ask, what happens when it all stops? But the truth is simple and terrifying to those who aren't ready. What you experience after death is shaped by how you lived before it, not your reputation, not your beliefs, your inner state, the I. Tibetan teachings don't paint death as a lottery. They describe it as a continuation, a direct reflection of the quality of awareness you cultivated during life. If your mind was reactive, chaotic, driven by craving, that chaos will greet you in the Bardo. If you lived ignoring truth, clinging to distractions, fearing silence, you will carry those same patterns into the next realm. And if you walked through life awake, mindful, and unattached, you will recognize the illusions when they arrive. Because make no mistake, nothing changes after death except your body, your C. Habits, your reflexes, your attachments, they follow you. This is why preparation must begin now, not through rituals, not through borrowed beliefs, through clarity. Start by understanding that nothing you own is truly yours, not your name, not your story, not even your thoughts. Detachment isn't about withdrawal. It's about not being controlled. It's knowing that possessions fade. Applause stops, bodies decay, but the awareness behind your eyes, that's what continues, and that awareness needs to be trained. Meditation isn't a luxury. It's mental conditioning for the moment when your mind becomes your only companion. You must learn to notice your own reactions. You must see how often you cling, how easily you fear, how deeply you avoid, because death doesn't give you time to figure that out. It simply reveals what's already there. And here's the hardest truth. Most people are unprepared because they've spent a lifetime pretending death isn't coming. They'll scroll, they'll work, they'll dream of a future that might never arrive. And when the final moment hits, they'll be caught, confused, desperate, and unaware. But for those who trained the mind, who faced the silence while still alive, the Bardo becomes something else. Not a trap, but a doorway. And that door only opens for those who already know what's behind it. For centuries, certain truths were locked away, not because they were false, but because they were too destabilizing. The Tibetan teachings on death were not hidden for being mystical. They were concealed because they threatened control. Ask yourself, what happens if people stop fearing death? What if they discover that no God sits in judgment, no eternal punishment awaits, and that the afterlife isn't a prize or a sentence, but a reflection of their own consciousness? That kind of knowledge doesn't just change how people die. It changes how they live, and that is exactly what the system cannot allow. From temples to thrones, fear has been the most effective tool ever invented. Religions taught you that your fate depended on obedience. Governments insisted your loyalty would be rewarded. You were told to confess, comply, conform to be good, so you wouldn't be damned. But if salvation isn't granted from outside, if liberation comes from within, the power structure collapses, because then you don't need intermediaries. You don't need institutions to mediate your afterlife. You need clarity, and clarity cannot be taxed or regulated. This is why these teachings were kept in monasteries, passed down only to those who were ready to question everything, because if the average person realized that death is not judgment, but revelation, the old hierarchies would lose their foundation. The fear of eternal suffering has filled offering plates and secured empires. But what happens when people realize the judge was never outside of them? They stop playing the game. They stop living in fear. They stop obeying blindly. They start thinking, reflecting, taking full responsibility for their choices. And that is dangerous to a world built on manipulation. Even now, in the age of information, this truth remains hidden beneath noise, wrapped in superstition, laughed off as myth. Because if too many awaken, the mechanisms of control begin to crack. The soul who sees death clearly cannot be owned, and nothing threatens power like someone who has nothing left to fear. What once sounded like spiritual metaphor is now starting to echo in the corridors of labs and lecture halls. The things ancient sages whispered behind monastery walls are beginning to show up in data sets, brain scans, and quantum models. It's no longer just mystics who claim that consciousness might survive physical death. Neuroscientists, physicists, even some medical researchers are starting to notice patterns that suggest something much bigger is happening. Take near-death experiences. People who flatline, heart stopped, brain activity gone, return reporting. Vivid encounters, a radiant light, a sudden awareness of everything, a panoramic review of their lives, a feeling of being outside their body, yet more present than ever. These stories are uncannily aligned with what the Tibetan masters described over 1,000 years ago, and they're coming from every culture, every language, every belief system. It's not coincidence, it's convergence. Then there's quantum physics. As researchers dig into the nature of reality, they're forced to question whether time flows the way we think, whether space is as fixed as it seems, and whether consciousness might be fundamental, not a byproduct of the brain. In other words, the mind might not be trapped inside the body at all. If that's true, if awareness can exist beyond neurons and flesh, then the Bardo isn't a fable. It's a field, a domain of mind-made reality where perception shapes experience, exactly as described in ancient teachings. And yet, despite the mounting evidence, this knowledge is still resisted. Why? Because it threatens not just dogma, but distraction. We live in a world designed to keep you from looking too deeply. You're encouraged to chase numbers, seek approval, stay busy, stay loud, stay numb. The message is subtle but constant. Don't stop. Don't ask, don't question, because if you did, you might realize something terrifying. You're not preparing for death, you're rehearsing for it, the way you scroll, the way you consume, the way you avoid silence. It's all practice, and when the final moment arrives, your reflexes will decide what comes next. But here's the good news, you can retrain them. You can stop playing the part they gave you. You can start remembering who you really are, a witness, not a character. Ancient texts and modern research are beginning to sing the same song, that death is not deletion, it is transition, and the shape it takes is drawn by the lines of your own mind. The old wisdom was never just metaphor, it was a manual, and now even science is flipping through its pages, discovering piece by piece what the mystics always knew.